Welcome to the Security Cocktail Hour. I'm Joe Patty.
I'm Adam Roth.
Adam, I thought I was impressed with myself for wearing the colors here, but as usual, you got me beat like by a mile. You got the shirt, the hat, and the background.
So normally it would just be probably the shirt and the background, but we had another podcast host recently and we sent him a hat. So I figured if he was great enough to have a hat, I'm great enough to have a hat.
All right. Well done. Well, order up another hat because we got another guest on today.
Sure.
Cody Pierce is with us. Cody, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, guys. I'll definitely rock a hat.
Oh,
All
you'll get in a
right.
hat then. There's no problem.
Yeah, you'll be rocking it on the West Coast too. It'll be like, bi-coastal. Awesome.
Mr. Worldwide, yeah.
That's right. Cody, you are the co-founder and CEO of Neon Cyber, doing a lot of stuff with, I think it's stealth. I don't know if I'm supposed to say what it is.
No,
Even
it's
though I
it's
know.
fine. Yeah.
Okay. Well, why don't you say, you know better than I do?
Well, it's a startup that's trying to secure your workforce. So we're really focused on understanding the workforce and the way that they interact with the outside world. And we've been working on it for a little over a year now, as you mentioned, still in stealth. But with a small community, it's not a rigid requirement. We're not trying to be a secret squirrel, but yeah, it's fun. It's a lot of switching from my background of device and infrastructure and the machines that we've been trying to secure for a long time to switching to trying to secure people, and that's a whole host of different problems. But we think it's one of the most critical and emerging difficulties of defenders to do.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you're doing defense, and that's really what we're going to be talking a lot about because you have a long background in offensive security. Quite a history there. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I mean, I think it's a lot of circumstance. I think everybody has an interesting story on how they got into cybersecurity. Mine definitely started as a teenager in the 90s, hacking and phones and the emergence of the internet. And for me personally, a lot of that was, the fun, I think, when you're young of breaking things and new technologies. And it's one thing to learn them, it's another thing to learn them and play with them to the degree that you start to make them act differently and differently from how they were intended. And so that really hooked me when I was a teenager, and I kept pursuing that. So I went and did, of course, at that time, there wasn't, certainly at my age, there wasn't really a career path that I could look at and say, offensive security or even cyber was something that I was going to do.
Well, not a legitimate career path.
No, no, yeah, there's definitely, you could see black hats and white hats diverging in career paths, if you will. But, I always I always liked the technology aspect, and I still do. I love to learn. I love new technology. It's fascinating to me. And so, breaking things was, kind of punk rock and fun. That's what I wanted to keep doing. And, I did that. I'd say, I was a Unix system administrator, was kind of the first job I had, like
Awesome.
a lot of people get into at that time in the
Yeah.
90s. And then finally got my first security job in 2000 or 2001, big Unix systems doing distributed Unix computing. And what's, I think, kind of the next journey is that something that from the offensive side I've kept with forever was, you know, a lot of offensive security is about finding technologies that people haven't looked at yet. So being around these big Unix systems, HPUX was the primary one because I worked at Verizon as a contractor for HP. Attackers and researchers weren't able to get access to a big HPUX system. And so that was the first time I found my own vulnerabilities. So I had been, you know, definitely into using exploits in the 90s and, trying to learn all of that. But I think one thing that happened was kind of a greenfield opportunity of both Unix and cybersecurity. So I started to find my own vulnerabilities. in HPUX and AIX and Solaris, and that really kind of started off my journey in probably 2002. And then in 2005, I joined the Zero Day Initiative, which, for listeners that don't know, the Zero Day Initiative came out of an iDefense vulnerability purchasing program. And Zero Day Initiative was some of the guys from iDefense had moved to Austin, started working for Tipping Point. And I am from the Dallas Fort Worth area. So I packed everything, loved Austin, and moved down there and started at the Zero Day Initiative in 2005.
I got to tell you, it's funny. I'm listening to you and the emergence of the internet, and I'm thinking to myself, the late 70s, early 80s, I was hanging out in a Radio Shack looking to see if I can get an acoustic coupler telephone modem or a 110 baud dial up. And then I also remind myself that when I was a kid, I used to buy the 13.56 color burst crystals. I think we spoke about this once.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to put it into the DTMF dialers to make the nickels, dimes, and quarters. And then I would put a ground from the phone to the to a payphone so that I can get a free phone call or cut the yellow wire escrow so the money would come back out. Now I know hopefully there's a statute of limitations about doing that because I don't want to get like locked up for 38 cents. But it's funny, this is how like we all started. Like a lot of us started in telephony. A lot of us used to do crazy things in telephony, and either whether it was war driving or anything like that. But man, I know I'm older than you, but you're talking about the emergence of the internet. I used to do dial up for bulletin board services.
Yeah, same.
So
Yeah.
that's when I was around. So
Yeah.
And it was around when the internet was like all smoke and everything going like that.
no, yeah, those are some. No.
Yeah, it's, and I think there's always a hook. I think, there's a hook in what's exciting, and there's a hook, and then there's the time in your life. Like what are you really, what is keeping you interested as a teenager or in your 20s or whatever. I definitely was into the phone stuff, but I had friends that were going wild in the phone world, and they were, we cloning cell phones, cloning pagers, cloning, and that was really, really cool. For whatever reason, maybe it's because of the Unix background, like the software side was always drawing me in. Maybe it's because I couldn't afford all these things, or I was still a teenager and couldn't go, to the market and buy all this stuff. But I certainly had a red box, and I would go to the BBSs and download all the different schematics.
Yeah.
Couldn't afford to build anything besides a red box.
Yeah. It's funny because we were talking with from another episode, Paul Asadorian, and we were having a conversation with them. We were talking about Solaris, and then the Ultra Sun workstations and the Ultra 10s, the Ultra 20s, and having that at home. And then we started, and I said, "Oh, by the way, man, I always wanted to get like an like a Sun laptop." And then we're like, "Sun laptop? Yeah, there was a Sun laptop for a short period of time in life, and like people didn't even know that existed, and I was dying to get one, but you know." Those are the old days. I didn't know what Unix was until I really saw an SCO Xenix, and it was from a point of sale system from Radio Shack. Those are the old days. And
Yeah.
Banyan Vines.
Okay, I should have said at the beginning that we're doing a drinking game. Every time Adam mentions Radio Shack, it's a drink.
Oh, is that what it is?
I should have, because you're doing that pretty consistently these days. You got
Hey,
a lot of
Radio Shack was the
stories.
spot, though. Mad respect to Radio Shack, because I don't think, now Radio Shack's no longer around, but
I just drove to Ithaca, and then when I was driving down the street, there was a Radio Shack store. There are
Oh, yeah,
like
I thought they were gone.
no, there are very, 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 very few. They still exist. I think they're franchises, they're not stores. Like you can go into a gas station deli / Radio Shack. They still have the logos. I think there's like a handful left. I couldn't believe it. I almost had a heart attack. I was like,
So
I'm
did
home.
did you
I was
put your
gonna say,
badge
did you
on?
go in, yeah, and like corner the kid and start telling them how it's done?
Back in the day when we worked at Radio Shack, there were so many things that you would learn. Like if you dialed a 700 number and the last four digits of the store, you were able to get any Radio Shack in the world. like in the country really, but in the world. So 700 dash, the first 3 digits dash, let's say the store was 1165. You dial 1165, you got that store number. There were so many weird things about telephony and numbers, and like people used to come in and teach me about like how you can actually mirror a number at a higher rate but a different exchange. Crazy stuff.
But I
Anyway, I
think,
learned that at Radio Shack.
Adam, it's a good point about, I think, a lot of the knowledge sharing and people just kind of working on something that not many people cared about. And so my heart is always in the community, because that was I was in my formative years. So swapping a bit of information with your buddy who gave you some information, or you'd go to a BBS to get or go to an IRC channel. It was
Yeah,
like you just wanted little tips, and if you were around enough people, the 950 exchange, or who had a party phone exchange, or it's like who has a code to it was very personal and exciting. That's you know and kind of to that point is there was a similar community in the offensive security world where someone would write an exploit, and then everybody would study it, and so certain people were really good at Unix shellcode, and another group in another country was great at writing remote Apache exploits, and so you were always looking for that little piece that maybe you didn't know, and retain it and then keep using it. So everything I've learned is some information I got from somebody else, right?
I,
Like
I don't.
I've come up with
Yeah,
some things, but it's just such a collaborative community.
I never did what you did. Well, hold on a second. Watch this. Hey Joe, Radio Shack.
But all right, thank you.
I
We
never.
should actually say we didn't talk about the drink in honor of Cody. We are well. Some of us aren't actually drinking cocktails. It was supposed to be mocktail day, but
Well, I'm sorry, but Cody, like I was really the worst hacker. I really didn't know what hacking was. I did get the back in the day when it even first started. It was two magazines, I believe. It was 2600, obviously, and I think it was 411. It was another publication the size of 2600 that didn't last many years, and those were people I think. I hope these people don't come after me from 2600, but I think they left 2600 because 2600 is in Mid Island, Long Island somewhere. But those guys are from over here and hacked the planet or hackers that was based on it. But what I'm getting at is I used to learn from some of these guys that belong to those groups about using assembly on Z80 back when I had a Model 3. Please don't make fun of me. And I used to go in there and shift the bits or change things in hexadecimal with a hexadecimal editor to get either more lives in a game or, I mean, I grew up on Crush, Crumble, and Chomp and these other games that people knew from the beginning, like when games were nothing, or typing in stuff on a 6809 or a 6509 for Apple, typing in all these adventure games. Oh my God, back in the day, those were fun.
Yeah, I still maintain that some of the best hackers were video game, pirates or video game programmers. I'm still fascinated by it because it's real. There's something about it, like getting those extra lives, that gamifies the hard work of trying to crack some of that stuff.
now besides all the software stuff, you talked about software, but you've done some hardware too,
I
right?
have, yeah. I was thinking about this driving back home for the podcast. There's hard there's software is all in your head, right? Like, yeah, you're typing, you're doing some things, it's all in your head, but there's just there's like a tangible kind of elegance and excitement around. I remember, even, I mean, you could look at like war games, right? Kind of going back to what Adam was saying, with a paperclip and some phones and a acoustic coupler. You could go to Terminator 2 with the ATM, where he plugged in the ATM. I mean, it's like the movies and the popular culture of just the hacking part are always a little bit corny, but the ones that always captured my attention and still do are where there's a physical device involved. It's just that kind of real world thing. And so I've done, by no means am I, a hardware guy, but I've done everything from the USB devices that create a keyboard or mouse to we mentioned red boxes, even on the offensive side, looking for getting JTAG set up and just exploring the firmware and dumping the firmware ROM. And there's something physical that I think is really exciting.
Dude,
I'm just not smart enough to do the real hardcore stuff. I look at like Joe Grand or some of the OGs, and my brain couldn't really do it. I stuck with the software.
look, that's
Yeah.
that's still pretty impressive because for me, I mean, maybe Adam, you did a little bit. I have never, I've been in computers for years. I know networking and software, all of it. I have never understood electronics. I mean, I can't fix anything. I can't do any of that stuff in grad school. They like tried to get me to work on a breadboard to do some things. I was freaking clueless. I can't use a multimeter to test my car. I replace batteries constantly.
So
I have no clue.
when I was younger, like I said to my dad, hey, back in the day, I shouldn't even be saying this either, but I'm like, Dad, can I take the TV apart? I want to put a WHT box. I'm going to put an antenna on the roof. I'm going to put a WHT box. I'm going to solder some stuff into the TV. And I got it to work. And by no means am I a hardware hacker or anything. I am a script kiddie in the parallel when it comes to hardware. A lot of what I have ever done, I have bought. But I'm not going to lie to you. I played with smart cards. I played with the 125 kilohertz back in the day when there was no encryption on the access cards, and now there's you know the smart chips, and then you have to use cloners, and you have to change each of the pages. So I know a little bit about that. I know a little bit to know I know nothing, but it's always nice to play. But I just don't have the time these days.
Yeah, I would recommend, you know, some of the most fun hardware stuff was not necessarily hacking related, but I've modified every game console I've had. So like putting a chip on a
Really?
PlayStation, is fun because then you're like, hey, now I'll go play any game I want. But
I've done that
Is
too,
that
but
a
I'm
thing?
talking
How
about.
the hell do you know how to do that? How
No,
do you figure
it's
that
out
stuff
there.
out?
It's
it's
out
out
there. I
there.
Is it
did
Yeah.
out
it.
there really?
And
It
it's
was very
fun
big
because there's
PlayStation One. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
you buy, well, yeah, PlayStation 1, the original Xbox, like those are really fun to go mod because you buy the chip and you got to solder it, and then you got to
Yes.
install an operating system and all those things. And nowadays, every, even designing chips and or designing circuit boards and stuff, it's all digital. So like the chips are, you know uh, system on a chip or stacked chips, and you get the memory and all that stuff. And so like I just never, I think hardware hacking is probably outside of the signal path and trying to do fault injection or something. It's really just which chip do you think has something you're interested in, and then there's probably a real time operating system on it, or there's some signals on there, and just buying like a JTAG and trying to find the right JTAG and hook it up. And there's all kinds of, what's cool if you want to get into that is really smart people have created the debuggers and the chips and everything that you can go try to play with. So you don't really need,
Wow.
in some cases, like a multimeter or your own breadboard. There's so much out there nowadays that you can buy for $20 and just start pulling
Really?
off USB, pulling off SPI, pulling off, all those things that you want. Then it's just getting the software off and looking at the software, and then learning how to upload or flash your firmware. There's a lot you can do now that is not as hardcore analog electronics as it used to be.
What I always wanted to do, Cody, if you want to come out to the East Coast and help me, I always wanted to make a candy dispensing machine for Halloween. So I would always go online every year and I try to find ready-made breadboards and apertures and different things electronics to dispense candy and maybe shoot it at somebody as they're walking across the street. But
Nice.
I've never really. There's very little out there. There is stuff out there to make it, but I don't want to make it purely by the design. Like I was a kid, and please don't make fun of me again, but I used to play with 555 timers, 556 timers. I used to play with PNP transistors. As a matter of fact, on LinkedIn the other day, we were talking about the color code and how people remember from the military. I never was in the military, or from the RCA school, which was a really obnoxious thing you can never repeat. How do you remember the color codes? But I used to love doing that stuff. And like, oh, do I need a 200 ohm resistor? Do I need a 2200 ohm resistor? Is it black? Is it red? I love those things, but I never was the hardcore solder, breadboard, wire wrapper. I tried it, I've done it, but I never got hardcore. That was really hardcore for me, for people that did that. I used to look up to them like, can I be your friend?
Well, Adam loves the Hack 5 devices, all that stuff. He loves that. It's always talking about his rubber ducky and his pineapple and this stuff. He was sworn he's going to write a script for a show about it someday.
I already
But,
started it. But
oh, yeah.
the truth of the
Okay.
matter is that a lot of people like it. A lot of people are fascinated by it. It's the script kiddie of hardware. Let's be honest. It's in all the movies and all the TV shows. Plus, but what the crazy stuff that's out there, the real crazy stuff. Let's talk about that, Cody. Right? The people who are stealing cars, that are buying those special. You can get it on your computer and the USB, and you can listen to it with an antenna. But there's kits for $2,000 that can literally be a script kiddie, get the signal, and it replays it right away. I mean, I know back in the day people were doing it. When I say in the day, the
It
last
doesn't
two
work
years.
anymore, though,
No, they
right?
do. Absolutely, they
Still?
do. They
I thought
still
that was
do.
fixed. It's a replay attack.
No, it's still working. Though some people are still trying to use the Hyundai, the older Hyundais. They're not modified. People don't. It's kind of like a vulnerability. If you don't bring it in and repair it, then you still have that vulnerability, and people are grounding out the um, the headlights and being able to use it as a bus in order to inject signals. It's still out there. Am I wrong, Cody?
No, I mean, I think I don't keep up on what's the latest, but I think you're very insightful to say that you do have to update it. It's software, and there's going to be new ones discovered. There's going to be new techniques discovered, new tools. It's too easy if you can get those to work because you just walk up and steal a car, and that's always going to be financial. So I think kind of going to that hack 5 and stuff. I think it's fun, and I think any way that you can get understand and get lower level in technology is good. It just helps you kind of understand. So understanding the physical security, understanding that people can do these things is enlightening to some people, because I think some people think of everything is just secure by default, or it's in my house. Or I don't mean us in cybersecurity, but I mean people that may not think about these things. And so those are good entry points.
So,
And I don't, I don't really, I mean, uh, whether you like it or not, if you're enjoying it, I think it's fine. But there is an issue with, I think, making things
Too easy?
sophisticated and easy to access that then changes the conversation a bit.
yeah, that's what I wanted to get into because you've got a really interesting story that you built one of those things, right? Why don't you tell us that story? It's a good one.
And this is, I think, part of the bigger conversation that we get into in a little bit. But so I built one, I have it here, like a rubber ducky kind
Cool.
of thing. They're just these little pre-built USB. This one's called a Trin key. I think I got it from Adafruit or one of those sites.
It was a nice site. I remember those. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely Adafruit. It's the Trin key RP2040 QT. And essentially, it's the same thing as like the rubber ducky, where it just emulates, or it'll execute code once it's plugged
HID.
in,
Yeah.
power up, execute your code. And
So
I
it's
made
basically
it,
a little computer with a
yeah,
USB that you can put
yeah.
code onto.
And,
That's it.
and you
And you
run
can just buy that.
you could
Wow.
just, these are $5 a piece, $5 or $10 a piece. And it's basically the same concept as the rubber ducky or whatever. And so I got it because I had a rubber ducky, and I didn't like how the code worked, and it wasn't flexible enough. And I knew I could do more. So I made that thing. I didn't solder all of it, just to be clear. I just bought it because, again, it's just so easy to spend $5 and get, a USB interface with a bootloader and all that kind of things. Then I started to write the Python scripts that will actually do exfiltration and unlocking, and I had it all in a GitHub repository and pictures of how to build it. And I bought Plastidip that you Plastidip in it, and so I don't have a 3D printer. I didn't want to make a case, but then I just decided not to push it to GitHub. And this is very different than what I used to do when I started at Zero Day Initiative and then went to Endgame and started to kind of change what I was doing, because I just didn't, I wanted there to be a barrier to entry, like I love to share. It's still part of what I like to do, but I didn't want to make it so easy that somebody who didn't care about how it worked was able to use it. And that's kind of the impetus of switching from offense to defense in some ways, but also my opinions have changed on publishing offensive cybersecurity tools and work.
It,
Once it can be used by people who don't care how it works or the impact, really changes the the uh, the
playing
context
field.
of it. Yeah.
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 So I'm going to jump in here. I'm going to say this, right? I know several people that have found 6, 7, 8, 0 days, and their feeling is, I don't want to release it. I want to do responsible reporting. However, if the organization doesn't do anything to resolve it, then I feel like I need to publish it in order to force their hand to do it. But not everybody is going to feel that responsibility. Not every manufacturer, not every corporation is going to feel that responsibility to patch it. And we've seen that, right? If you don't do something, I'm going to release this 0 day information in 90 days. 91 days later, they release it. The organization hasn't done anything, and people get compromised. But at least the people who are responsible that follow this, they know what to do. They might not be able to resolve it, but they might be able to add other layers of security. And that's what security is all about. It's not about one layer, it's about multiple layers, it's about mitigating, not stopping. We never stop issues, we mitigate them. Yes, sometimes mitigating them does stop them, but we never get to a point where we say, man, I can sleep at night. My network's 100% safe. It never is.
Yeah, it's a great kind of prompt, because when I joined ZDI, it was a vulnerability disclosure program. So the way that it works is you can find a vulnerability and you report it to ZDI, and then ZDI pays you, and then they are in charge of disclosing it to the vendor and working on the timelines and working on, getting alerted when there's a patch. And then once that happens, then some details will get published. So I spent 4 years there.
Yeah. And Cody, before you go on, I should probably just give a little background to everyone that before that was in place, one of the reasons things like that came about and what we called responsible disclosure is because people used to, their guys are bug hunters, vulnerability hunters. They'd go, some were, bad and would go to the vendor and say, I want some money.
Bug bounty, yeah.
Or, yeah, well, not a bug bounty, just straight out blackmail. Someone
Yeah,
say,
that's true too.
I want money, or I'm going to disclose it, tell people. And then there's the opposite side where companies would when someone just altruistically came to them with a vulnerability, they'd threaten them and all,
Yeah,
threaten to sue them, whatever. So the ZDI and the initiatives like that were to get something that was ethical and safe and good overall for everybody. Right.
that was the idea. And the idea was to really, we were always trying to represent the security community, right? And so represent them as a for-profit company that had security solutions. It was good marketing. It was good. It was good interface to these type of things, because Tipping Point also wanted to protect their customers. So there was kind of a win-win by having a vendor like Tipping Point and the Zero Day Initiative go to the affected vendor. It was easier to do that because we had people who had those contacts, who worked with those vendors, and we would make sure that the researcher got credit. We would make sure that the vendor had a avenue to push off the timeline. And I loved it. I think it was a really good moment, but we certainly went through times where vendors, wanted to sue or wanted to mishandle it. And I think we had some good people at the time who were able to talk to the vendors and say, look, that's not the right path. Like, we will work with you. We really think, and it's hard to kind of talk about this now because things have changed. This is 2005. So we were trying to advocate that security is important for every vendor. And instead of attacking people that are trying to, at the end of the day, improve your security, I think I'm always an optimist that, certainly the people we're dealing with wanted money and wanted recognition, but most of them were really good actors. They were, great, smart people. So trying to get the vendor to say, hey, look, security is a critical part of your business. And the small community in cybersecurity is really going to watch how you react. So if you start trying to sue people, if you start saying these things about reducing the exposure of this thing, it's not going to work out well for you. And that's a battle you win, sometimes you lose. It certainly was my first entrance into the economics of vulnerabilities as well. So the economics of what you pay for a vulnerability and that scale, and then getting into where I went to afterwards at Endgame of 0 days and those economics and things was really rounded out how I felt at the time, and reasons that I changed my opinions later uh, about disclosure and responsible disclosure and whatnot. Um, so I'd say in all cases, vendors have gotten better. But what has not gotten better is the ability, and I'll caveat all this, like, everything has gotten better in cybersecurity, but the problems have gotten bigger. So we don't have to manually patch as much these days. We don't have to wait for necessarily those Microsoft Tuesdays to come out. It's important for people, but we've got enough technology to deploy patches and stuff like that. So what has
I'll
not
tell
gotten
you.
better is the amount of work that defenders have to do, and the amount that they have to prioritize is overwhelming. So as I've learned and matured, I am very empathetic to what, your CISOs, your SOCs, and all those people have to do from a priority perspective. So while it's easy to look at a vendor and say, you have 30 days or I'm releasing some information, there's a long tail of what defenders have to consider along with their priority. And so they may, in certain cases, not be able to patch on day one. And that's the missing link that I think I even had at some point, to say you can't enforce an arbitrary timeline on everyone in the world. You can push vendors to patch, but the patches aren't always the end all be all of fixing a vulnerability.
And you're right. It's about priorities. I'll tell you, one of my peeves, I've never been, well, for a long time, I wasn't at a place to produce software or anything. I was at I was a defender or practitioner or whatever. But one of the things that would drive me nuts was when you got someone, not even externally in IT, who'd say, oh, I found this problem. And he says, I found this problem, tells you about it, and walks away. And tells everybody else, tells your boss, whatever, you got this, or an auditor finds the one thing that he knows how to find, and, and it gets blown up, and that becomes your top priority.
We talking about a vendor,
And
though?
actually, I'm talking about internally, but I mean, the same thing applies to vendors. If I play devil's advocate,
Of course,
I mean, it's like, the thing that's making all that noise jumps to the top of the priority list.
but
And, the
yeah,
person making the noise may not know what you're working on now. You may very well be working on something even nastier than
and
that.
that goes
And
back
now
to
it's
the
been
legal.
pushed aside.
Yeah, that goes
Yeah.
back to the legal framework, Joe. We've experienced that together, right? People can experience 0 days based on against a purple team, against doing some kind of assessment on your organization. But that legal framework should mean that the people that you enter into a contract with, whether we're employees or whether outside vendors, should have some kind of NDA or ethical disclosure agreement built into that. And not every organization has that, but if you're engaging in a tabletop, a purple team, some kind of assessment, there should be a non-disclosure. But what I wanted to bring up one thing, Cody, what about the underground? What about that dark side of 0 days? I mean, that gets to be sometimes dangerous, right?
Bad guys.
Yeah. So,
Not even the bad guys, some of the good guys too.
well, I'll progress the story then to that issue, right? So I left.
Okay.
So there's a huge difference in a vulnerability and an exploit, right? So it's undeniable that there's a massive difference. So we have 60,000 vulnerabilities every year, right? And 1% or less are actually exploited. And there's a very, very good reason for that. But I went from discovering vulnerabilities and writing proof of concepts for those vulnerabilities, because at ZDI we would always need a proof of concept so that the vendor could reproduce it or that we could reproduce it.
And you validate it's for real.
Yeah,
You're able
yeah,
to demonstrate
exactly.
it. Yeah.
And so a proof of concept, it's just going to kind of trigger the flaw, not necessarily fully exploit it, unless we just decided it was something fun to try to do. But then I really wanted to go down the route of writing exploits, because I saw that that not all vulnerabilities were the same, that there's a black magic to writing exploits. And
And it's fun, I hear. I haven't done it,
Well,
but I
let's
hear
do
it's
this.
fun.
Let's do this. Can you tell us what the difference between a vulnerability and an exploit is for the audience and stuff? This way they're going to listen. They're going to ask that.
yeah, a vulnerability is potential. So a vulnerability is a potential security issue. An exploit is the actualization of that of
Executed,
running
right?
arbitrary code or gaining some kind of privilege and being able to do that in a way that gets you additional access. So you can look at vulnerabilities and say, yeah, that seems like you could exploit that and I could become administrator or execute code. The devil is in the details. So an exploit, though, is going to actually get you the shell or the privilege escalation, or you'll execute arbitrary code. And at that point, it's really kind of the uh, in different ways, it's a proof of what is real, right? So I've worked on looking at a vulnerability and understanding the exploitability of it just from a hypothetical perspective, now all the way up to now where AI can read a vulnerability disclosure and try to generate an exploit. But at the end of the day, it's really to just validate beyond a shadow of a doubt that this is usable by an attacker. So I started to get really fascinated into that, uh, because it always kind of bothered me if I had found and disclosed a vulnerability that I truly didn't know if it was a high, medium, critical, earth shattering, or just unexploitable, because until you get in there and do it, it's hard to know. So I started to kind of work on that offensive security, vulnerability discovery I was doing for many years, and then writing actual exploits. And so I went to a company in game and started actually writing exploits, discovering the 0 days, writing exploits, and got deeper and deeper into that marketplace, those techniques, what it means to write a proof of concept versus a weaponized exploit, what the economics of a 0 day are, what is the value of that type of thing, what is the longevity. So there was a lot more about that area of research that continued to fascinate me. And so I ran that team for 8 years, 8 or 9 years, but certainly started off on the 0 day discovery and exploitation and weaponization of those exploits.
And the company that you worked for, they sold those exploits to people.
Yep. Yep.
And
Not to
believe it
people.
or
I
not,
want to be very clear
well,
to U.S.
to whom
institutions,
did they? To
to,
U.S.
to
institutions.
U.S.
I
to
see.
U.S. entities with the authority to use them.
I see.
And
Okay.
that's kind of like my point, right? If there's a 0 day out there and you might get a visit and say, don't you publicly disclose that because it might be utilized for other reasons.
I'm sure that happens, but I don't think it works quite that straight. It's not that straightforward. So you
It
know, and
never is.
it never is. And that's part of why this conversation is really fun for me. And I no longer do that work, but any kind of dual use technology, whether you're using it for defense or offense, it's going to have a gray area. And where the business model really that I was working under was to find vulnerabilities and 0 days in highly popular software and then package those up. And we had contracts, so kind of back to your NDA and legal frameworks, like we had all those. There were occasions where I would hear of a patch that was coming out that affected one of our capabilities, and we needed to tell people. um, and there were times when we would find a 0 day and write the exploit and get ready to deliver it, and a patch came out. We'd have to go refactor it, or we'd have to go look and say that it only works on these versions. And part of developing something, I don't necessarily like the term weaponize, but that's what's used in our
So
culture. But
yeah,
you'd have to go and say, oh, hey, it only works on these versions. So you'd have to find a way to make sure that it only works on those versions.
yeah.
There's anecdotal stories of people delaying a patch. I think that's such a minute thing that has happened or
Well, I'm
whatever.
sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
but like Cody, check this out, right? Let's just talk about one thing for 1 second. Stuxnet or whatever they called it. Stuxnet, because I don't know the legal framework, whatever it was. Stuxnet was done by Symantec. That was the name they used. But there was several 0 days in that execution, right? Of Stuxnet. So those 0 days were gathered. Those 0 days were not published. Those 0 days were used
Yeah.
as a weapon,
They
I would
hung
say.
on to them, and they say they bank a lot of
Yeah,
them.
you bank a lot, and we found dozens and dozens. And you want a deep set of capabilities, and it's really target specific. So there's certainly capabilities we found that apply to all Windows systems or Linux or whatnot. And what essentially you do is you chain your exploits. So it's all automated. Maybe not in that case because it was such a
That
high
was
value
unique.
target, but in most cases you want to chain your capabilities. So you would have a remote capability that may be very targeted, let's say like a camera or a file share like a Samba. So we had
PLC. No, I'm
like a
kidding.
Samba exploit, and then you have a Linux privilege escalation exploit, and then you have a something that allows you to pivot to other systems, and then if you had a target like in that instance, then you probably get to the management system of a controller, and that becomes highly targeted. So
Well,
you
it's
you
like
always
chess.
have a chain.
It's like chess. You want to move a certain amount of steps. Step one is this exploit. Step two is this exploit. Step three is this exploit. And not every step works. You might have backup exploits for each step, right? So if
Yes.
I'm doing step one and step one works, but I go to step two and step two doesn't work, what is my backup exploit? What's my other backup exploit?
Yeah.
What am I using in order to keep on moving laterally forward?
Yeah, and it's and I think this is important for anybody in cybersecurity. No attacker is going to use a 0 day until they have to,
Oh my God,
because
yeah.
losing
Yeah.
it is much more expensive for that attacker than whatever they're trying to compromise. So
Right. Because
that
when you use
exploit,
it, it's disclosed.
yeah,
Everyone knows that.
exactly.
It's not a 0 day
If
anymore.
if it
Right.
gets burned, you maybe have a little bit of life, but you also have attribution. So you don't want the
Yeah.
attribution of your 0 day to come back to you. So everyone of any means is going to try in days or disclose vulnerabilities. They're going to find you're unpatched. They're going to do all that. And then if it's high value enough, they will do a targeted, attack. And the difference in, like spray and pray, what we see 99% of the time, and what you see on the 1% or less, is those things when they fail, you don't know. When they are successful, you don't know. So everything we would build would be, you call it like continuation of execution or fingerprinting or whatever it may be. When it does its thing, it knows it's going to be successful,
So
and then it knows how to
yeah.
clean up. just a different stratosphere that I don't think people should worry too much about until it becomes public. Like if it becomes public, then by all means, the next layer of cyber criminals are going to use it at random and at scale.
At
I'm gonna,
scale.
yeah,
That's it. Yeah.
I'm gonna give you an example. I go to CVS, which I don't know if you have CVS on the West Coast, but it's like, a pharmacy. And in the pharmacy, you get these coupons attached to your number. And I might get a 50% coupon, but I'm not going to use that 50% coupon to buy a pack of gum. I'm going to use that 50% coupon if I'm buying a $150 item and it's $75. So it's similar to the exploits.
Yeah,
You're not
it's
going to use
economic.
something unless you really need to use it for the right thing.
Yeah, there's an economy behind it, and there's economics behind it, and that's not this is no secret. There's been books written about this and everything, but the economics I think are very interesting because the economics are not controllable in a lot of cases. So you have a time of when you've written an exploit until it's patched. Some of those exploits are still unpatched 10, 15 years later. Some got patched before you finish, and the economics of it crater. So if you go from something that is worth, let's say, $50,000 as a 0 day, the vulnerability and the end day is maybe worth five because it's much easier to write. I hate to say easy in this world, but it's much more efficient to take a vulnerability that already has everything you need to do and go write an exploit. And if it's simple enough,
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, we just should say that the defender side is that, once the vulnerability is used, once it's detected and becomes publicized, then the detection systems for it are throughout the whole industry happen within hours. I mean, virtually instantly. So it
So,
becomes virtually worthless
yeah.
unless people are not doing a very good job of patching and detection and that kind
And
of
some
stuff.
things can't be patched, right? So, for example, back in the day, you had a 2000 server. And on that 2000 server, you had this really customized proprietary application that was built on that. And there's no way you can move that application to another server, to a later server. So what did you do, right? You couldn't patch because there's no longer patches from Microsoft. Then you had to use microsegmentation, deception, ACLs, things you had to do layers and layers of security because you needed to keep that application running. But what you would do is you would Wireshark. You would look, what am I communicating with? What's the only necessary ports to be opened? Source, destination port, source, destination IPs. And then you would put other layers in between. It might be authentication between the points or VPN or IPsec, whatever it is. That's how you had to do it. So there were times where no longer that operating system went into the sunset, but you had to find a way to still maintain it. And people are like, are you kidding me? Why would you run an operating system out of date? Because sometimes you had no choice.
yeah, and I mean, that's even like MSO 8067, which I think was around the time of Stuxnet.
It's at the SMB?
Yeah, it's one of
Wow, I
the
remember that one.
but it was devastating because
Nasty.
it would because once you're I don't think of the perimeter as like the castle and moat, but once you were on an internal Windows network, you just needed one, right?
Yeah,
And
that
that
was
kind
a
of goes
bad
back to
one.
the patching. I think people have gotten better, but that's the opportunistic piece of any attack is it's opportunity, it's discovery, and you're always going to find the things that people forgot about. Maybe it's the NT4 server in the closet or, someone that hasn't updated. And that's really tough. But
Oh, yeah.
So that's the catch 22, right, Joe? Right? You're that engineer that says, crap, I got to find a way to maintain that Windows 10
Yeah.
machine or that Windows 2000 machine. And then you're going on all the different boards. How do I do this? How do I do that? Yeah, email me at adam@mycompany.com. Whoa. You just gave
Bad
out onset.
idea.
You just gave
Yeah.
out public information that you're running that. You just gave away the keys to the kingdom. I'm not saying they're going to get right in there, but if they send you an email and there's an execution that when you receive that email and Windows and Microsoft Office or 03, or when there's a vulnerability there, you just gave yourself away, right? I mean, so you
Yeah,
have to be
that's a
really
mistake.
careful what you advertise too. It's a catch.
Yeah, and I think it just kind of goes back to the defense problem. Like, and after spending that time developing 0 days, and I'll say, there's a lot of misinformation out there about those types of programs. Like anything, there's good actors, bad actors, gray actors. Like, but what I realized is, I had so much empathy for the defenders. It's a really, really impossible problem. You've got all this new information, all this new technology, and you're trying to keep up. And, you're often seen as someone that is bothering people by bugging them to update their system. And,
Of course.
that to me
Yeah.
became, I think, a lot of it is just personal maturity and getting older and seeing how bad things can get. But that empathy led me to, moving more towards defense. And part of that journey was at Ingame, who also switched from offense to defense. So they
Oh,
went,
really? They did.
yeah,
I
yeah, they went
didn't know
from,
that.
offensive cyber to an EDR solution. A lot of us
Endpoint protection.
had to
Right.
pivot and get into
Good
the
to know.
EDR. And it was fun because we essentially had a lot of those capabilities on the offensive side. And thinking about them from a different lens was yet another new area to kind of explore and to uncover. And
Okay.
having the background of doing these things helped you provide capabilities to defenders, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
As a defender, you have to be right all the time. As a person on offense, you only have to be right once.
I would say maybe. I think it's just,
You don't like that, do you?
well, that sounds really overwhelming to a defender, right? And
But
maybe
it's
it,
really
it probably
true.
gives it
It
probably
is.
gives a little too much credit to the attacker, although it is, there's rings of privilege. So it's like I'd say most people don't have those rings sufficiently far enough apart. So you may compromise a system and you've got Active Directory access to every system. In that case, the attacker needs to be right once. So
Yeah.
I definitely advocate for separating your trust into different rings. And a lot of people are good at that. So it is hard. It's harder in a lot of cases to fully compromise a business, but what the defender is having to do is not necessarily maybe be right all the time. It's they're prioritizing correctly all the time. So they need to
Yeah.
prioritize correctly all the time. And that's really, really difficult.
Yeah, the reality of defense, and I'm glad you have some empathy for it because I've always been on the defense side, is you can't fix everything. You make it as difficult for the attackers as possible. You close all the doors, many doors as you can. You try to make it so we catch them if they get in. But, the whole cliche of, what keeps you up at night. Well, everybody in security knows there's a way in. It's not impossible. It's possible. It's not easy for the attackers either, but it's possible. And that, unfortunately, is the reality of the game. It's just what happens.
And there's limited budgets, Joe. We know this already,
That's
right?
right.
You can want everything and every tool and everything possible, but at the end of the day, that budget's going to be limited. Plus, as a defender, you don't have always a large team behind you, and you have to constantly be up to date on what you're learning. So I don't want to make it seem like the defenders are not doing anything. They're certainly doing a lot, probably more than they should be. But at the end of the day, again, I keep on saying that the company's only going to have a limited amount of resources, whether it's money, whether it's people, whether it's educating you. What I was getting at is not that you only need to be right once because you're always going to get in. It means if an attacker gets in, they got in, right? But like, it's like being in a boxing ring. You can put your hands up and block almost every single punch, but eventually if somebody wants to hit you, they're probably going to hit you. Now, it might not be a hard hit where you get knocked out. You might be able to get back up and defend, but you always constantly have to be on your guard in order to
And you're going to
defend
get
against an
tired.
offender. Yeah,
You get tired.
Yeah.
I think that the way that, in cybersecurity and thinking about this problem is, it's a tough role. It's a tough to keep up. There's always new technologies. There's always new attacks. There's all this new stuff. And it's easy to kind of get caught in a wheel of, well, I'm going to secure a piece of technology. I'm going to secure this thing. And that's not the right approach. The right approach is to become really good at prioritizing based off your budget, based off your time, based off your skills, and based off the company's, crown jewels, or what the company cares about protecting. And then trying to just, I like tabletop exercises, or collaboration, and say, what happens if this person in HR's system gets compromised? Just ignore that it might happen or that it may not happen. It's like, what happens? Because that actually drives priority, and that drives budget, and that drives, some kind of strategy. And without that, it's just going to be a bad time to be in that organization's cybersecurity program, because even if you had unlimited budget, without that insight, without that strategy, without that understanding, you're going to be actually confusing and complicating the matter. So you need visibility into your technology, you need prioritization, you need controls, but it's impossible to do all that until you've sat down and said, what are we really protecting? What happens if this device is compromised, or this data is leaked? And that's really the only thing that, in my experience, has kept me from going crazy with all the new things that come out. And that goes for vulnerabilities and exploits too. If you've had that exercise and an exploit comes out, hopefully a light bulb goes off and says, we run that router. I know exactly where it is. I have visibility into it through my logs or my, database or whatever, SIM. I'm going to go check it out. That's what really I think keeps people trying to refine their security programs, and is really beneficial, seeing it from the attacker side and also seeing it from the defense side.
Yeah, well, defense is tough. It's very complicated, like you're saying there.
I'll say,
And
if we got to wrap up, I'll say it's tough, but the best thing about cybersecurity is the impact you have on society, the impact you have on the safety of real people. And that's why I've kind of gone back into that role. And I empathize, because you wake up every day and you can make a difference in the world, and you can keep people safe, and you can have a real impact. And I think for our offensive intelligence, and that's also keeping people safe. So I don't want to get it twisted that there isn't
when
a
done
digital safety.
correctly
Yes, when done
and
with
ethically,
ethically. And I'll
offense is
say the
very
people that
important.
I worked
Yes.
with, on the classified side, incredible people, incredibly passionate about the mission, and incredibly moral. And you have to just believe that that's the guiding light of those type of operations. But defenders are having to do that across every aspect of society, not just intelligence collection or warfare. And it's a really meaningful role. So keep at it, and find your priority and your groove. That's why I think I've been in cybersecurity for 25 years, and you find a lot of people who've been in it for a really long time that absolutely care about making it meaningful, and securing people, and doing the right thing.
I'm doing a doctorate on ethical cyber warfare, and people look at me like, "Is there such a thing?" I'm like, "Yeah, there is actually." I mean, and I'm not going to go into the whole thing right now because this is the end of the podcast. But what people have to remember is that, like, for example, you get into a fight in the street, you can either kill the person possibly, or you can thwart them off so they leave. But some people, they want to go as far as they can go, as fast as they can go, to completely pummel somebody to a point where they're probably never going to exist. And that's how I use the analogy about cyber warfare. You do just enough to accomplish your task, but there are other countries and other nation states that want to take it as far as they can to show they have no ethics and they have no concerns. And that's what I'm getting at. And that's the same thing with doing an attack. How far are you willing to go? How far do you want to go? How much you want to devastate something?
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, it's certainly not something I can I can help solve. But as we're increasingly more, our society is a digital society. Every company is digitally connected, and you're always going to have bad actors. You're going to have good actors. That's just life. No matter, you go back 100,000 years, right? It's more about planning on what do we need to do to not make this a complete catastrophe. And to your point, I mean, there's definitely escalation. Like, people don't want to escalate. I don't think countries want to escalate, but some do. Some like to do that, and that's just the reality. And you've got to have a deterrence, and increasingly those deterrents are digital. That's the way that you deter things sometimes, is to show power, to use something. And that's just the way that the world works. And
Peace through superior firepower.
yeah, it's some of us lived through the Cold War. It was all about escalation, and nobody wanted to do it, but it was always hanging over your head.
The argument is countries with nuclear weapons are never going to want to use them, which is why they claim there's no war. So I don't know how true that is, but
Well,
that's some theories, right?
yeah, well, hopefully that holds. But in any case, well, you know what? A lot of us do this to try to make things better, even though it doesn't always seem like it. But Cody, I am very glad to see that someone who was on the offensive side was a good guy, but also that you've come over to our side, to the defense.
Wait, well, who
Because
says it's our side? It might be your side.
it's your side too.
Oh, sorry.
You only
Dream
want to
of it.
be a hacker. You're a defender. Come
Yeah,
on.
I like hard problems, and the hardest problem is on the defensive side right now.
It
Yes,
is.
sir.
Offense gets the glory, but defense wins the game.
Offense
Right?
is very, very fun until you start to realize that you're impacting people. That changes it a little bit. When I was young, didn't necessarily have that level of empathy, but there are necessary aspects. My heart will always be in offensive security research. It's just how I grew up. But there is growing need to just take a beat and say, hey, do I have friends that are on defense that are going to have a nightmare and have to work all weekend because I do this thing? Maybe that's a check. Maybe there's something there.
Well, let's say, look at it this way: if you're watching soccer and the goalkeeper keeps on preventing the ball from going into the goal, everyone's like, "Yay, okay, cool." But when the striker is kicking the ball into, oh my god! Yeah!
It is fun. Yeah,
All right.
that's where. Yeah, there's definitely a rock star feeling to it. Not me personally, but I think there's definitely an aura of doing it, because it's really technical, really difficult, and you're doing something and sometimes that no one else has really done that you know of, and you feel good about it. It's an accomplishment, and I think that's to be celebrated. But there's also people that have to prevent that, and they don't get as much celebration by preventing 1,000 attacks a day or 40,000 attacks a day.
Yeah.
Your goalie thing is very apropos. It's like they're over there getting beat up with a hockey puck or a ball in their face, and
Yeah.
they're the last to leave the pitch, and they're exhausted. And the
Yeah,
offense
no,
is fighting on their knees, pumping it up, and I like that. I like that.
Thank you.
All right. Well, Cody, this is a great topic. There's a lot of stuff here that's all about technology, but also ethics and even Adam's favorite, cyber warfare.
Hold on a second. Wait, Radio Shack. Sorry.
Yes,
Radio
Radio
Shack, okay.
Shack. Here's
There
the
we are,
Radio
yeah.
Shack. They took it hard when they started selling the cell phones.
That's right. Okay. Well, Cody, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank
This
you,
has
Cody.
been-
All right.
this has
Yeah,
been a lot of
appreciate it,
fun.
guys. This was fun.
Thank you.
All right. And thanks everyone for listening.